La candela, la vela. No fui yo, she said. La señora? Claro. ¿No se levantó? Antes que yo. He drank the coffee. It was just grainy light outside, and Arturo was coming up toward the house. He saw his father at the funeral, standing by himself across the little gravel path near the fence. Once he went out to the street to his car, then he came back. A norther had blown in about mid-morning, and there were spits of snow in the air with blowing dust, and the women sat holding onto their hats. They put an awning up over the gravesite, but the weather was all sideways, and it did no good. The canvas rattled and flapped, and the preacher's words were lost in the wind. When it was over and the mourners rose to go, the canvas chairs they'd been sitting on raced away, tumbling among the tombstones. In the evening he saddled his horse and rode out west from the house. The wind was much abated, and it was very cold, and the sun sat blood-red and elliptic under the reefs of blood-red cloud before him. He rode where he would always choose to ride, out where the western fork of the old Comanche road, coming down out of the Kiowa country to the north, passed through the westernmost section of the ranch, and you could see the faint trace of it bearing south over the low prairie that lay between the north and middle forks of the Concho River. At the hour he'd always choose, when the shadows were long and the ancient road was shaped before him in the rose and canted light like a dream of the past, where the painted ponies and the riders of that lost nation came down out of the north with their faces chalked and their long hair plaited, and each armed for war which was their life, and the women and women with children at their breasts, all of them pledged in blood and redeemable in blood only. When the wind was in the north you could hear them, the horses and the breath of the horses, and the horses' hooves that were shod in rawhide, and the rattle of lances, and the constant drag of the travois poles in the sand like the passing of some enormous serpent, and the young boys naked on wild horses, jaunty as circus riders, and hazing wild horses before them, and the dogs trotting with their tongues a-loll, and foot-slaves following half-naked and sorely burdened, and above all, the low chant of their travelling song, which the riders sang as they rode, nation and ghost of nation passing in a soft chorale across that mineral waste to darkness, bearing, lost to all history and all remembrance like a grail, the sum of their secular and transitory and violent lives. He rode with the sun coppering his face and the red wind blowing out of the west. He turned south along the old war trail, and he rode out to the crest of a low rise and dismounted, and dropped the reins and walked out, and stood like a man come to the end of something. There was an old horse skull in the brush, and he squatted and picked it up and turned it in his hands. Frail and brittle, bleached paper white. He squatted in the long light holding it, the comic book teeth loose in their sockets, the joints in the cranium like a ragged welding of the bone plates, the muted run of sand in the brain box when he turned it. What he loved in horses was what he loved in men, the blood and the heat of the blood that ran them. All his reverence and all his fondness and all the leanings of his life were for the ardent-hearted, and they would always be so and never be otherwise. He rode back in the dark. The horse quickened its step. The last of the day's light fanned slowly upon the plain behind him, and withdrew again down the edges of the world in a cooling blue of shadow and dusk and chill, and a few last chitterings of birds sequestered in the dark and wiry brush. He crossed the old trace again, and he must turn the pony up onto the plain and homeward, but the warriors would ride on in that darkness they'd become, rattling past with their Stone-Age tools of war in default of all substance, and singing softly in blood and longing south across the plains to Mexico. The house was built in 1872. 77 years later, his grandfather was still the first man.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.